Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here. I really hope that you're having a good time, that you're enjoying this Congress, that you have seen interesting presentations. I figured that at this time of the day, probably your minds are about to probably melt, or hopefully even melt from all the content you have been seeing. So I thought to myself, I can also just approach this presentation in a bit more casual way, perhaps. So I thought that we could just talk about not the insights industry, but make it a story of it, and talk about the quest of the insight story, and see who is the hero, what are the challenges the hero meets, what monsters he has to fight. So this is the quest of the insights industry, and like with every good story, we begin with our hero, right? Our client. We can call him Jason. And of course, Jason, before he met all his Argonauts, is a person that comes from Thessaly, of course. And Jason has his own company, and what he wants to do, of course, is to maximize his revenue. He wants to sell more. He has his customer base that he needs to understand in order to sell better, and in order to that, what he basically needs is to gain those insights. And these insights are basically this golden fleece that he is after. You're laughing, but I'm going to butcher this story way more. So every time he thinks about the insights, he needs to really understand his consumers and sell you even more. He really gets excited because he knows that if he gains all those insights, he's basically going to go back to Thessaly and become the king, go ahead of his competition and really maximize his revenue. In order to do that, of course, what he needs to do is to pray, and he talks to Zeus, the market research agency, pretty regularly, so that he can gain those insights. And this has been actually going fairly well over the years. There has been an exchange, right? He receives those insights, and then he hands over part of his budget. This exchange of services, as I mentioned, has become established over the years. It works fairly well and has been growing over the years. In 1990, we had an industry with worth about $5.4 billion US, and as of 2023, we just published that the global market research sector has a turnover not of 5.4 but of $54 billion US after a growth of 4.6%. It's a positive, relatively modest growth. It is signs of an industry that is fairly established, quite mature. But it's been going well. But Jason hears like a little whisper in his ear. And this is, of course, Hera, who has been sitting next to Zeus and learning a little bit about the ways of research. And then she sells this idea to Jason and says, do you realize that I can help you out, and I can help you out to basically carry out all that research in-house. I can sell you some tools, some platforms, some subscriptions, and basically you can start integrating some of these processes in-house. Of course, Jason loves this story. And so he sets up to create his own insights department. Here you see him already getting ready for it and organizing a one-of-a-kind Olympic marathon in which he's choosing the best of the best. And here we have Hercules, of course, who we know is one of history's best data analysts. And along with this, he manages to assemble a whole crew, a full insights department. And look just how confident they look in this picture. This is when they are ready to basically embark in the Argos, sail away, go all the way to Colchis if needed, and get that golden fleece of insights by themselves. Of course, none of this comes for free either. So this exchange of services that I was discussing, basically, or the budget of the client now is funneled to these two types of companies. Jason lives in a complicated world. So not only does he need all this, but he also needs to a guide to know what to do with all those insights, how to implement those in a nice way. And this is where a new player comes to play, which is the reporting and consultancy services. So now the budgets of that client need to be right or are funneled to these types of companies. This is basically the simplified picture of the insights industry, and we can and it has been actually growing fairly well over the years, right? As we can see, and we just published in our global market research report that you can see here in its friendly URL. We can see market research that we saw in the previous slide. It has $54 billion US dollars of value. Research software, nonetheless, has already surpassed it in value. So Hera's Whisper has been working fairly well. It's actually an industry that is growing basically 3 times faster than market research. And finally, we have the reporting at $33 billion US dollars to make up a full industry of $142 billion US dollars. There is a different way we can think about this, about the industry, which is by triangulating it. We put, of course, Jason in the middle, who is driving all these forces. And here we can see Zeus at 54 billion US dollars, here at 56, reporting at 33. But as we know, companies are not, they don't only cover their own sector, their own area. So market research firms also engage in those subscription models, in the software. We know that research software has been getting into or specializing as well into full service, into different types of research. So there is a part of an exchange that goes from one to the other. Until now, we just didn't know what was the size of this exchange. But thanks to changes in the methodology that we use to calculate the size of the industry, right now I'm happy to say, we can basically show that the industry really could really look a bit more like this, in which we can imagine market research getting or using areas of research software, and likewise, and how everyone is playing or getting into each other's game. As I mentioned, we didn't have data on this until this year. If we zoom into market research, for example, we can see that actual full service research and fieldwork services account for around 65% globally of what market research firms do. Almost a third of all the turnover that market research firms gain or obtain actually come from engaging into research software activities. And this has a pretty major consequence, because if you think about it, we have the fact that research software is valued at about $56 billion US dollars, but market research firms doing research software is about $16 billion US dollars. This is more than 50% of the total value of the industry, and this has consequences because research software itself is also growing fairly fast over the years. So it is growing. It has quite some implications, and I'm going to touch upon 2 implications. So if we go back to Jason, I will explain what he saw when he started hearing about all these fantastic technology tools. The first consequence is the allure. Hearing about and seeing the capabilities, letting yourself be guided by by the story, by the narrative of a tool that is going to resolve all your needs. Of course, you can see all the tools that the market has to offer. You can even check out and have a meeting and check one of those tools, see how it can function. You can get a bit closer, but before you really commit, eventually you need to know how to properly assess that tool to see if it's useful or useful for you. And that's why at some point you need to know which questions you ought to ask. And this is why Esomar eventually published the 20 questions for buyers of AI-based tools. Questions that Jason here, you see him asking this AI provider is, for example, on the company profile. How much the company knows about artificial intelligence, or conversely, how much the company knows about market research. Is the AI capability or service explainable and fit for purpose? Is it one of those black boxes that nobody can uncover, that you don't know what's going on inside? Or can you explain in simple words how it works so that I can understand as well? Can I understand the limitations of this tool? Can I see whether it really is what I need, how I ought to apply it? Is the AI capability or service trustworthy, ethical, transparent? What is the data set that has been used to train it? Is it properly sourced? How about the consent of the data subjects? These are all questions that may have huge implications if they are not covered. How do you provide human oversight for your AI systems? And this is an element that we have seen that legislators all over the world are definitely going to look into, because we need also a level of accountability to know who is responsible for what. And lastly, what are data governance protocols? And this is, every AI tool also needs to abide by a certain level of regulations, like, for example, GDPR and whatnot. So these are questions that are properly organized in Esomar's 20 questions. We invite basically everyone to go to their suppliers, present this to see how they would respond to this. This is basically how Jason avoided a surprise, because if he were to contract a company and not do the due diligence that is required, he would eventually find a nasty surprise, or he could find a nasty surprise that could be expensive to resolve, or tricky to resolve, or that may deal with a loss of reputation and whatnot. So we need to prevent these things. The second point that I wanted to touch upon is risks that AI tools can bring forward, like, for example, on data, on consent towards the data owner, intellectual property. Are we doing the right thing? How about privacy? How about anonymity, pseudonymization? Things like this. In this one, you can see that apologies. You can see that Jason is actually quite confident. He's looking with, like, not very afraid of these ones, because he has been fighting them for quite a while as well. Because these are not risks necessarily associated with AI. He's been fighting them, and he has been winning. He has been winning because, as a client, he has been demanding that all his suppliers eventually abide by Esomar's code of conduct. So he's demanding that there is sufficient responsibility towards data subjects, to clients, to the general public, to the research profession at large. So these are tools that he has been also demanding from his suppliers, as I say. And this is the code that Esomar presents, and that many also associations all around the world, more than 60, are applying and defending themselves. Let's imagine what would happen if this were not the case. Here we see Talos, who is sitting at top of his large vault, and part of Jason's crew here are basically walking towards there to learn which AI tools they can find, they can see. And they enter, to one of these fairs. Everything is shiny, everything is amazing. Everything that they see sounds good, is going to solve all their problems. They fail to do their due diligence, to ask those questions, and they just pick whichever item they think is the shiniest one, is going to resolve things. If this goes unchecked, uncontrolled, without a sufficient level of self-regulation, basically what we will encounter is, just as Jason was looking at the Golden Fleece, we will have regulators looking at the profession at large. And what do regulators do? They regulate. And if they see an industry that is basically loose, without control, with low levels of self-regulation that we promote, this is the picture they will see of a person that is basically surrounded by threats that they will need to rein in. Let me give you an example. Here we have the European Union AI Act that has been recently presented. there still is the question of where some of the AI, say, items that exist, what is the real level of risk, and depending on what is their level of risk, they will need to pass certain checks and certain, to be treated in a certain way. What is going to happen to elements that are very present in the research function, like, for example, emotion recognition, biometrics, the presence and oversight of AI systems in interviews and questionnaires? How about secondary data, the usage of it, and training data? All this area of anonymization, pseudonymization of data. What's going to happen with that, right? The regulator needs to understand where that falls. And here we see the regulator already looking at this industry in this very PG-13 picture that I show here. And he roams around Crete looking at all these companies that are, that may not be showing that level of self-regulation. If they're not convinced, eventually they may prevent the industry at large to basically flourish and to basically sail the broad sea. They will limit it, and if they limit it too much, they may severely actually damage it. This is the main role of Esomar and many other associations, to provide that dialogue, the dialogue with Talos, so that we can explain what the risks are. We can make sure that while the citizen is protected, that it also allows the industry to flourish. So going back to the previous example, in very simple terms, what we want to do is that whenever these items are placed in each one of these levels of risk, that the regulator thinks, all right, but let me carve this exception when we are conducting research. And this is the dialogue that we provide. Basically, this is a way to explain how we are observing and reporting on the industry. We need proper data to understand what we're talking about, to see how, what we are presenting to the regulator, etc. We need the proper tools to show that we are doing things right, and we need a proper code to ensure that we can show self-regulation. That's how eventually the entire industry, both Zeus for market research, Hera for research software, even little Jason here, can continue to exist, can continue to flourish, and how we can manage to level also the field and allow for opportunities. In fact, we see those opportunities will continue to flourish. For 2024, we expect that the industry is going to hit $154 billion US, and the growth for each of the sectors is going to, or is expected to remain quite similar to this year. So it seems a very healthy growth. With all this is how eventually we are all helping Jason reach his goal and reach that golden fleece of insights that is going to allow him to go back to Thessaly and basically reign over this whole thing. If you want more information on the reports and on everything that the professional standards does, we will be tomorrow at the meet and greet, tomorrow morning. And for more information, now we are going to have Judith as well. But for the rest, this has been the quest for the insights industry. Thank you. Thank you.